tonight. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I should be applauding you. Cool. I'm going to wait for everyone to get recombobulated, and then I don't really have any funny stories to tell you. I'm not a very funny person. I'm just kidding. So, yeah, it's hot, huh? It's really fucking hot. We good? Sweet. All right. Cool. Hello. My name is Chelsea. I will give a little bit more introduction in the next slide, but thank you so much for coming here. This talk is going to be in English, but all of the slides are in English and in Japanese. So スライドが日本語が書いてあるから、もしなんか英語が困っていたら大丈夫です。そうするとなんか質問があったら日本語でも英語でも大丈夫です。私は一生懸命頑張ります。Alright. So, my name is Chelsea Hostetter. I'm a senior UX designer at Goodpatch, which is a design firm here in Tokyo, and I work out of Shibuya. So I've been working for about 5 years now in user experience design. I was first an interaction designer. Well, actually, first I was a front-end developer, and then I was an interaction designer. And then I became a design researcher and interaction designer, a UX designer, sort of all of that. So I've been through a lot of different rounds, iterations of myself in design. I've worked at companies like FedEx, Capital One, Samsung. I worked through freelance and through a global product and design company by the name of Frog. I worked there for 3 years, and now I'm working here in Tokyo. So I also like to do workshops, which is why we're all here today. I have done workshops in 4 different countries, so that would be Helsinki, Moscow, and in the United States, which is my home. And I will talk a little bit about Texas and my hometown for a little bit. But I really like talking, I really like being around people, and I love all you lovely people and seeing all your shining faces. So today we're going to have a little bit of a talk, a little bit of a workshop. So if you're scared to talk to the person next to you, just leave the room now, because we're going to be talking. All right, so tonight's talk is about designing for the LGBTQ community. So I'm just going to give you a warning to those of you who are at like the gender like 202 or like 402 level. This might be a 101 level, but I'm going to have these conversations for you, so you can thank me later. For those of you who are like, what is all of this about? I will be talking with you, holding your hand, and we'll be going through this together. So the first question that I get asked a lot of times, because I am a straight appearing person, is why are you even interested in this topic? Well, about 4 years ago, I created an application, a pilot application called Query, and the initial ask was to connect communities together and to make an impact on my local Texas community. So I lived in Austin for 8 years. And in the beginning, much to the, how do you say, chagrin of my instructors, I picked the queer community. They were under the impression that the queer community did not need to be helped. I completely disagree with them. And part of the reason why I picked the queer community in the beginning was because I identify as queer, and I have since I was 16 years old. It's not something that people normally talk to me about or normally have a conversation with me about, because I have a husband and he's cisgender, and so we look straight. And so I sort of hide in plain sight when it comes to being in the queer community. And so one of the things that I wanted to know is to just get a little bit deeper into the community that I felt so disconnected from. So part of it was for the community's impact itself, but the other was for me. And so we spent 10 months going out to transgender and gender non-binary folks' houses, places of being, places where like people are getting together and having drinks and having really serious conversations with them about safety and community, and where are places that they felt safe, and where are places that they felt like they had the most community. And the other thing that I did during this sort of research process, one of the things in design research is all about generating ideas and building empathy for your future user, is that I chose to present as male for a week. I bound my chest, I adopted a new name, I talked to my family about it, they were not happy about it. It was, for me, an exercise in empathy on trying to understand what it feels like to be born, to have a body that is different from the gender that you identify as. It was uncomfortable and it was weird, but it was also very, very educational for me in trying to produce this application. So we got a lot of responses from people, like just a lot of amazing stories about community, about safety, personal stories, stories that would make you cry, stories that I just wanted to hug the participants. And from that, we made a ton of ideas on how to help specifically the trans and gender non-binary community in Texas. And we took all of those ideas, we prototyped them out, we started testing them with people, and at the end of the day, one of the things we realized from the participants overall is that in-person communication with the queer community can be sort of few and far between. There are some events that people in the LGBTQ community go to, but because they're sort of spaced out and sometimes they're part of like one small unit or there's another small unit, they're not really connected together. And so somebody who might not be part of any of these groups might say something like, where are all the queer people? I don't know where they are. And somebody who's hyper-connected is like, wow, there's so many queer people in this place. So there's a huge disparity of like hyper-connected people and not very connected people. And the not very connected people tend to use online mediums. And so what we wanted to connect to other people who are queer. And this also mirrors my personal experience in conservative Texas, where I had a lot of straight friends, a lot of people who were like, oh, I'd be so gay, if you were gay right now, I'd punch you, and I'm like, ha ha ha, oh my god. And like just having that sort of like atmosphere around me drew me to the internet to find other people who were my friends. In fact, my very first girlfriend I met off of the internet. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was say, how can we bring the internet into real life interactions? Because the reality is that, I mean, I'm gonna maybe peg myself a little bit as a Luddite here, but like, the reality is that when you're feeling really down and when you feel like you need help, it can be really, really difficult to talk to people on Facebook and people be like, oh, e-hugs. Sorry, you're feeling kind of bad. It's not something that we talk often about, and a lot of times when we talk about in-person communication versus digital communication, a lot of people are like, well, are you being anti-digital communication? No, I mean, that's where I met some of my best friends ever. But there are some days when I'm really down and low and I really need a hug. And so we wanted to figure out how we were going to bring these digital interactions into sort of the physical online realm. And so we created Query, which was an application to allow people to meet other people through a one other connecting person. So you know that person who's always sort of like going to a bunch of different groups. What we would do is we would ask them, all right, who are two of your friends that you don't know? And we're gonna pair those two people together in digital space. They're gonna talk a little bit. If they like each other, then we're all gonna go out to coffee together. And at that coffee, there's going to be different themes around community and queerness, and we're going to have a conversation about what it means and what it feels like to be queer. And so Query itself was a huge hit in the community. A lot of people were super weird about it at first because they were like, I'm meeting a total and complete stranger and I don't know how I feel about this. But we had a really great response rate from people. One person wrote that they felt invisible until they saw another stranger see them for who they are. And it really touched my heart to know that a lot of people in the queer community walk around feeling a little invisible all the time, and so when someone really sees us, and especially like a stranger, it can be a very, very powerful feeling of love and acceptance. So what does this have anything to do with design or anything that I work on? Well, small details that contain our assumptions around gender have a huge and hidden impact on LGBTQ folks. And so I'm going to get more into this, but first, let's talk about definitions. What is an LGBTQ? Can I eat it? Sometimes. So LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. Sometimes you just see the LGBT, but you definitely see the rainbow flag a lot. And a lot of people see this as like, okay, this is the flag of colors, this represents this amorphous thing called LGBTQ. I'd like us to get a little bit hierarchical for a moment, because I'm a huge IA nerd. Let's talk about what that actually means. So generally, when we talk about queer, queer is a very blanket term that encompasses a lot of different identities. And it encompasses two different subsets. One is orientation, which essentially means who you like. So, for instance, someone who is lesbian likes women, someone who's gay likes men, someone who's bisexual likes everybody. And identity is about who you are, who you identify as. So somebody who is transgender is somebody who identifies with a gender that is outside the gender that they were born with. So that doesn't necessarily mean the opposite gender, by the way. So even within this group, there's a bunch of other subtypes of queer people. So just by saying LGBTQ, what you're talking about is all of this, but also more. There's tons and tons and tons of different labels, and all of these are, this is not a complete exhaustive list of everyone in the queer community. But when someone says, like, I'm queer, they mean something here. And so, me personally, I identify as this. Identity, God, I don't even know where I am anymore at this point. So, like, whatever, right? Pending. And so this is important to just recognize that there's a lot of different types of people out there in the world, and LGBTQ doesn't just cover that. Two terms, I mentioned transgender. I also want to mention non-binary because we're going to be talking about it a lot. Non-binary is somebody who identifies outside of either male, female, or somewhere not around that spectrum. So if you were to think of male here and female here, somebody who's non-binary could be here, they could be here, they could be here. It doesn't really matter. The idea is that it's not one or the other. And the thing that I learned from my research mirrors the thing that I feel in my sort of day-to-day life, which is that it's really lonely living outside the norm. Every day, people in events will remind you of the fact that you don't belong and that you're not wanted. And one of the things I took away from a lot of the amazing people that gave their time and their energy to talk to me is that we in the queer community are normal. We're human, and we have value as people. However, every time we have these sort of day-to-day interactions with people, small things, really small things, where somebody will like misgender one of our colleagues, or maybe somebody will just assume, you know how girls are, and you're like, no, I actually don't. I don't know what that is. These sort of day-to-day interactions that seem friendly on the outset, but ultimately say this world wasn't really built for you. This world doesn't really accept you. And so that's something that can be really hard, especially for somebody who is designing for other people. I see this mistake happen over and over again where there's a lot of assumptions being made, particularly about gender. So we as designers, how do we affect this change? Like, what is our impact on the LGBTQ community? Well, as digital and physical sort of start to merge together, there's a lot of basic things that we have to go through day to day that are quite unfair to people in the LGBTQ community. So to go through everyday life, you generally have to fill out basic forms. There are basic forms you have to fill out, sign up, setting forms, any kind of forms. Generally, most people are on Facebook. Some of you are not on Facebook, but this is generally a day-to-day part of life. Buying clothes, if you're a nudist, that's cool too. And also going to the bathroom in public. So these are all things that have been designed by designers. These forms are designed by software designers and programmers. Facebook was designed by designers and programmers. Buying clothes was designed by architects, service designers, people who are business type retail merchandising, and then also architects as well. So these all have some sort of purpose and intentionality to them. So what do you think is the thing that is the biggest assumption that gets in our way from making these accessible to all genders? It's okay, you don't have to answer, it's this. It's the assumption that there's only two genders and that these genders are normal, and that each of these comes with its own different types of traits. If you're a woman, you're X, Y, and Z. If you're a man, you're X, Y, and Z. And there's this little line, there's not a lot of space between here, but there's nothing in here. And I see this a lot on bathroom doors, right? That you have the women's side and the men's side, and these are sort of arbitrary labels that we give to people. So instead of just explaining this to you sort of didactically, I'm going to do a little experiment, and this is where you're going to get a little uncomfortable, I think. So I want you to break into groups of 3 to 4 people. Decide one of you is going to be the writer of the group, and it can be in Japanese or it can be in English. And together, we're going to talk about our stereotypes about men and women. And this is a judgment-free zone. You should feel free to actually talk about the things that you are saying, yes, this is what I think, a general man would like or a general woman would like. Because we're here to learn, we're not here to judge people. So, 3 to 4, I'm going to pass out sticky notes, and we're going to start our exercise to decide who's going to be the writer.
Each group should have 1 or 2 markers.
Sticky note pen.
Each group has 2 markers.
Oh, actually,
That's fine. We have a circle. That side of the room is not
yeah, 1 first. You might need 1. Hey guys! Hey everyone! Sorry, I said guys, that was shit. Hey y'all! Alright. Does everyone have a writer and someone in the group? Post-it notes? Yes. Everyone has a pen? Okay, cool. Alright everyone. Nice. Okay. I know you're so raring to go. I'm so excited. Alright. So, first, we want to brainstorm for 5 minutes. We're going to brainstorm for 5 minutes. What do you think the average man likes? And this is one sticky note per characteristic. So, meat or whatever, right? So 1 sticky note per characteristic, 5 minutes, go. Okay, Mina. Hey, y'all. Okay, I want you to spend the next 2 minutes whittling it down to the 2 most generic characteristics and hand them to me. What do you think is the most generic characteristics of a man from the one that you generated? 一番一般的な。Yeah. What you think is the most average? choose your favorite one. Yes. All right, 1 minute. 1 minute to decide. Two per group. Thank you, thank you. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. So he really likes power, dominance, and strength. He loves that. He also loves pussy that's falling off. He also loves being dominant over people who are submissive. I see where you're coming from. He'll like sex, ladies, pretty girls, models, super into sports and cars. Also likes the sciences and tech, and sort of, I guess, maybe likes a little bit less. Video games, competition, superiority, money, keeping his hair short, road time, and action. It could be here in sex, potentially. Cool. So that's our average male. All right, let's do it again. 5 minutes. I want you to talk about what the average woman likes.
Can you move? There's tape right there. Wait, what's it for?
For just keep it secret.
Okay. Okay. Oh my god, wait, I have a funny story. It's not that funny actually, but yesterday I went out to a inside town. I was catching up with an ex-girlfriend who I'm not friends with, but we were just like chilling or whatever. And then this really drunk guy came by and he was like harassing us or whatever. So we were like, okay, but then some of his friends, it was like my friend accidentally ordered an alcoholic drink and she doesn't know who you are. And so we were like, I wonder if they want it. Bad idea. But anyway, we were about to get into the table. And then two of them come over and they are like super excited. Anyway, we were in a conversation and like my voice is obviously pretty low. And so he was like, are you a girl? And I was like, yeah. And then he was like, okay. And he was very drunk. So he asked me this like 4 times just the night. But then he asked me for sex despite not being sure.
Wait,
so
what?
An inclusivity win. I could be harassed in bars now too.
Wow. Yeah, truly parroting now.
He was like, are you a girl? And I was like, yes. And he was like, sex? And I was like, he literally just said sex. And I was like,
Kimoy. Wow. Well, I mean, yeah, I'm not happy about that. I'm not happy that you got harassed, but it's also sort of like, I'm glad you made it out there.
I thought it was funny though.
Totally. Because like, you're like, well, I guess, sure. Like, no, I mean,
Well, they accept it even if he doesn't believe it.
right.
You know?
Thanks for accepting me, but also like, get out. Oh my god. That's insane.
Funny time.
I had many experiences with drunk dudes in bars. One moment. Let's see. Male characteristics, we're not going to get my favorite is when cisgender try to do this exercise. They don't be sexist, but like, we're talking about it. Like, all right, same instructions as before. 2 minutes, pick 2 per group. The most stereotypical woman.
Shiny things.
All right, anyone who has not had any Hostetter? Yeah, all right, everyone simmer down. Simmer down. Everyone, okay. I'm going to introduce to you our average woman. She loves fashion. She loves shopping. She loves getting her nails done and being pampered, and just in general, sort of like beauty products and looking good. Loves that. Also loves talking and gossip, which she does at her Joshikai. And she also loves sweets, which I thought was like, this is like super terrible. She likes sweets, but she also likes new diets as well. Worried about her weight, I see. And she's really into harmony. She loves rich men, romantic movies, and just in general being fragile. Beauty. Okay, yes. More love for the family and beauty as well. Great. Cool. All right, so, who wants to be my one-person volunteer? Who wants to volunteer? One person I need. Yay. All right, yay! Cool, all right, so let me ask you. You are kawaii wine and cooking. All right, kawaii wine cooking. Yes. So I want you to pick sort of the 3 to 5 characteristics that describe you as a person. Not necessarily from here, but just tell me.
This is difficult. I mean,
You're kawaii.
kawaii. Yeah, I like all alcohol actually.
Okay.
I don't discriminate.
Alcohol.
I do actually really like cooking.
Cooking. Okay, so 2 more.
Well, I'm a designer, so I'm creative. I'd like to think of myself as creative anyway.
Creativity.
And then, I don't know, nice.
Nice. Okay. So you're nice, creative, you're cute, you like alcohol, and you like cooking. So where on the spectrum are you? Just like, how do you identify between these two?
You know, it's really interesting because I've never been asked that question before. Definitely leaning more towards the average man than the average woman, but definitely there are qualities of both that I
Yeah.
identify with.
Do you enjoy power?
No.
Do you enjoy getting together with your friends and gossiping?
Yes.
Nice. Excellent. Okay, I have one more thing to ask you to do.
Yes.
So you've never met me before,
No.
right? Okay. So you know probably very little about me except for what I told you. What do you think I like? What are the 3 to 5 characteristics that that define me as a person?
Ooh. You're dressed very well, so maybe you're interested in clothing. Well, you do design, so I'm assuming you're creative. But you're also in tech, so I think you maybe have like an analytical side to you as well. Well, you mentioned that you really like connecting and talking with people, so I think you're very social. And then, I don't know, nice?
Is that a hope or?
It's a very, very big hope.
Where do you think I identify there?
I don't know. I'm cheating because I think your pronouns are they, them. So possibly between, possibly not on there at all.
Yeah. Do you think I like power?
No.
Do you think I like sweets?
Maybe.
Do you think I like dieting?
Who likes that?
Okay, one last question. Let's see. Do you think I like bro time?
With the right bro.
Very good, great good answer. Thank you so much, Hawaii. So the reason why I like publicly embarrassed that very, very sweet man, and also the reason why I had you do this is because I wanted us to sort of talk openly about the stereotypes that we see in the world and the stereotypes that we carry in here. To be fair, I actually do like power, but we can talk about that after. It's really, really easy to understand nuance between the genders if you encounter something that you know well, like yourself. So I can easily, myself, I can say like, yeah, I like video games and power and sweets and massages and fashion and, you know, keeping my hair short, sort of. And I can say to myself, like, yeah, but like I identify as this, and that's okay. But a lot of times when you meet someone for the first time, or you don't have a lot of information about them, you're more likely to rely on stereotypes. A lot of times, and in this, I think it's kind of a forced exercise. I put you on the spot, and it's super sweet that you said all those things about me. Mostly true. But like, it's important to recognize that because these exist in the world, we're more likely to default back to them if we don't know the person that we're talking to. So a lot of times when we only know the information that somebody is a woman, we will default to our general sort of experience of what womanhood is in our culture. And I don't think I need to tell you this, but nothing hurts more than someone assuming something about you that's patently untrue. So, for instance, as a foreigner here, I sometimes go to hotels and I talk to the concierge and I'm like, tell me a good teishoku place. And like, the word teishoku comes out of my mouth and it just sort of leaves the air and they're like, what about hamburgers? And I'm like, I don't actually like hamburgers that much. And they're like, there's a great hamburger place like down the street, right? And so like, they see my eyes, they see my skin, I'm a foreigner. And so foreigners, specifically Americans like myself, like hamburgers. And in that way of sort of being omotenashi, in that way of being like, oh, I want to help you and like I want to predict what you're going to like, they're ending up stereotyping me in a way that feels kind of uncomfortable. So with that, I want to sort of show you some of the examples that I have. These examples are taken from my friends in the queer community, and then also in some of the research participants' quotes from Query. So this person, Z, identifies as non-binary, and Z was signing up for a coupon service. Said coupon service was either if you picked female, then they would show you options for spas and nail polish and that sort of thing. Or if you picked male, they would show you options for like, like, what is it? Like 20% off like 2x4s and like construction and DIY and stuff, right? Well, this person likes construction and DIY, but they also like spas. And so what they ended up doing was Z would put in their name as female, and then all of a sudden Z would switch it to male. And this happened, Z would have to change their name manually every few weeks to get coupons that Z actually wanted. Another assumption that hurts the LGBTQ community is this idea that there is a real name and there's not a real name. So a friend of mine, and really, I would say talk to anyone who's trans or gender non-variant about this. And Facebook deletes trans and gender non-variant people's accounts, and this is a big deal because we, as like a community, I talked about the queer community is very into keeping in contact through digital means, and sometimes it's not our physical friends, it's our digital friends. So Facebook is a very meaningful service to keep in contact with people. My friend is non-binary. Their birth name doesn't fit them, so they changed to a new name. Their friends call them that name, and the definition of Facebook's real name policy is that your friends, your real name is the name that your friends call you by. Well, they're called Q, and their Facebook name is Q, and somehow Facebook said, well, that's not a real name, so I'm going to delete it. And they lost a lot of access to their friends. And so these two big assumptions, the male-female binary and like all the stereotypes we have around that, and then the fact that there exists real and non-real names, are two of sort of the big assumptions that we bring to the table when we're doing design, when we're doing programming, when we're making anything. So as a designer or as a programmer or as somebody in business, how do you help when you're making a product? How do you help when you're doing those sorts of things, right? Well, one is I see a lot of this in forums. I see male-female as a radio button. I see male-female as a drop down, a select one drop down. I see male-female and not specified, which is super vague and really doesn't get to the heart of whether somebody actually wants to tell you their gender or not. And then this was taken from a class syllabus of a programming course, and not Code Chrysalis, but another programming course that says, let's practice radio buttons by using sex. Oh, well, I mean, that already sets you up as a programmer for failure, right? And these are all things that are sign-up forms, settings forms, payment forms. These are forms that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And these are things that are in our software all the time. And so the question that I want you to ask yourself when you're doing these sorts of form designs, these really small detail form designs, is why are we using this information? Like, what are we getting out of this information? If it's for research purposes, does it matter that somebody's a male or does it matter if somebody's male, female, or otherwise somewhere on the spectrum, right? If it's a study about gender, I can understand that, but otherwise, why are we asking for that information? If it's for marketing analysis, marketing has always sort of been rife with assumptions about gender and like promoting to gender. So we really need to ask ourselves, why are we doing this? What benefit is the user getting out of this? So this is an example of the wrong way to do it, and the right way to do it, or at least a better way to do it. So for instance, instead of asking gender, male, female, or, perhaps the reason why you're asking this is because you want to know, the system wants to know how to refer to a person. Well, if that's the case, then you ask for their pronouns. It could be he, his, she, her, they, their. It also could be a fill-in-the-blank kind of thing. This design tells users why we're taking this information and also gives them an option to fill in their own, and it allows for a lot of flexibility. And you'll also learn something, right? If this gets chosen enough, you might need to add another pronoun pair. to your system. So really it's about letting people know exactly why you're collecting the information and how that information will be used to provide value back to them. Now, as a designer in Japan, I've seen sort of this, a kind of like difference between people in the United States and people in Japan, in the sense that people in the United States just won't fill out the form if they find it too sort of like, I don't understand the benefit of this, why are you asking this information? Whereas people in Japan will fill it out, but if I ask them after they filled out the form whether they thought that the sign-up process was easy, they'd say, no, I didn't like it, it's hard. And so someone doing something doesn't necessarily mean that someone's consenting to what you're doing, right? And so it's important for us to remember that just because someone does something doesn't mean that they actually love sign-up forms. It just means that they're just trying to get through their day, and a sign-up form happens to be a barrier to them going through their goal. The other thing that I want to caution you against is just slapping in transgender as an option, because this is a status that is very flexible. It's also a status that sometimes people don't really want to disclose in forms. And so you can say, all right, you know, I would even say like the non-binary, like forcing people to disclose non-binary is not necessarily like great. But having multiple gender options, if you absolutely need to have them, and then ask someone, you know, would you identify yourself this way? Again, the use case that I'm seeing for this is primarily like research studies on gender, and it's specifically queer research studies. But otherwise, we want to allow people the ability to not just be pigeonholed into a corner and say like, oh God, I have to choose male, female, or trans. Like I don't want to out myself as trans, but I'm also somewhere between the two. I don't know where I am, right? That's the kind of thought process that's going through when someone's looking at a form like this. And it's not a thought process that you necessarily want someone to encounter just randomly when they're going through their sign-up form. So, giving the user the opportunity to disclose. The last thing, and for those of you who are programmers, which I gather is many based on the show of hands, that you can do is if you're worried about guessing what sort of the latest pronouns are, you should check out this site called the Pronoun Project. I helped start this site with some really lovely people at T3, which is a design studio in Austin. And at the very, very, very bottom of their page, they have a code snippet that you can just copy and paste, and it has all the latest pronouns on there. So if you need it, it's there for you. It's on the internet, available just for you. So the second thing I want to tackle is in forums, how do we get around this idea of like real name? What is a real name, right? These are screenshots from Facebook saying like, oh, your account's suspended, you know, what do we allow on Facebook, right? And when I think about like real names versus fake names, so this is real names, and these are fake names, and it says, are they? Like what? So I guess Tanaka Taro is a real name, because if it gets inputted in certain systems, then people say that the system says it's okay. Also sometimes in English, Tanaka Taro, Hostetter Cherishi, my name, and then also my name in English is sometimes okay in systems. However, every once in a while I encounter systems that say, no, your name has to be in katakana. It is not actually a real name unless it's in katakana. Well, hold on a second. I'm from the United States, and this is my real name. Probably, honest to God, as God's witness, this is on my birth certificate, right? And so, like, it's super weird for me when I fill out forms and I'm like, real name has to be in katakana. What? Also, for those of you who know Kesha, wonderful artist, she has a special character in her name, so her name's not real, also. My friend John Lee, his name is also not real, because these are only 2 characters, and some systems only take 3 or above. Not a real name. And Maiko-chan sometimes also has trouble having a real name, because there are some systems that only take in kanji. So not just like your first name has to be kanji, it can't be katakana because we think that that's like the furigana. So my question is, why are we letting systems define what a real name or a not real name is? These are all real names, right? All of this is. When we say like Kesha and somebody says, oh yeah, I know Kesha, like we have just had a communication about somebody's real name, right? And one of the big things that I hear a lot in my industry, in the programming industry, is edge cases. So when people say like, oh, that's an edge case, we don't want to really worry about that, right? And I love this dude, Eric Meyer. He says, edge case is all too often code for use case that I don't want to deal with or think about. Because the reality is that we, as the LGBTQ community, are edge cases, right? In somebody's mind who's developing a product. But aren't all of us a little bit edge cases? We're all a little bit weird. We don't fit in this binary, right? We've already established that like, some of you like these things, some of you don't like these things, some of these things are outside of the norm. So doesn't that make us all edge cases? And we in the LGBTQ community, if we encounter these small things that make us feel unwelcome, then we start to feel as a whole that we're unwelcome. We're the edge case in the world. And that's a pretty shitty position to be in, to be quite honest. And so the thought that I want to leave you with tonight, and the thought I want you to think really long and hard about, is that we as humanity are messy and we're strange, and we're not average people. The queer community and our community in general depends more and more on these online softwares and communities in replacement for in-person exchanges. And we are depending more and more on binary code to define our non-binary interactions. So I invite you to think about the ways in which you can make a system more flexible, the ways in which you can stretch technology, because we, as humans, created technology to serve us, and currently, in the way that I see it is not serving the LGBTQ community in the way that it could be, and it's not serving you in the way that it could be. And so, consider tonight the ways in which you're messy and strange, and the ways in which you're weird and not average, and think about how we can make our technology a little bit more weird. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
So, what advice would you give to people who, I say, work in organizations that are more conservative? For example, only has male-female genders for passports, for example.
Yeah.
How then do you advocate and without feeling like you're the fringe all the time, right?
Yeah.
Like, why are you so being an activist? Let's just this is the most easy way to do things, Or
Yeah.
they say it's a security concern. You need to have male or female because when you're going through airport security, you have to have a passport that matches, so I need to see the medical certificate, seeing sex change, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
How do you advocate an organization that is so stuck in that mindset?
Yeah, no, that's really good. And especially in like government offices, it can be really difficult because you're talking about like legal documentation, right?
Yes.
So the way that I would approach it is the way that, if you haven't already, check out Microsoft's inclusive design. And it's essentially a toolkit geared towards conservative organizations to make them think and expand their mind a little bit more around like, a lot of times when we talk about like gender and gender diversity, we are seen as sort of like, oh, this person's super out there, or like this person's super liberal, right? But like, if you take it in the context of being like, hey, so let's just say that situationally, like, there is an event where like, and specifically I think like Microsoft Inclusion does this very well with disability. So they talk about disability when people think of disability as like an immutable thing, like a person in a wheelchair. Like that's what disability looks like. But in reality, disability is very like amorphous. So you have temporary disability, and then you have situational disability. So somebody who is a amputee is somebody who is permanently disabled. And somebody with a broken arm is temporarily disabled. And somebody who has a child in their arm is situationally disabled, right? And so I see the same thing, or I see the same way with gender in that way, where we can say like, look, you know, I know that you think I'm out there when we're talking about this sort of thing, but like, consider all the other edge cases and circumstances that you could possibly like think of when people are going to the airport and like having their passport checked, because like it could be anywhere from somebody like, this is, you know, kind of a trite example, but like I had a cisgender partner who like got misgendered all the time because his hair was super long, and so like he would get in fights with like airport security because they'd be like, "You're definitely a woman," and he's like, do I need to pull down my pants for this like conversation, right? And so like it's one of those things that like a lot of people are like, well, I would never have airport security problems, so like I don't think anyone else does. And so it's important to just sort of like bring that conversation back into, you do know that there's a lot of different circumstances in which people go through like airport security and have problems with this that aren't just like specifically within the queer community. And I feel like that brings people a lot closer to being like, this person's not just crazy talk, but like we're actually trying to make the world better for like everyone. Yeah.
You worked in a couple of different countries, at least 2, right?
Yeah.
Can you compare working as a designer in your home country to working here? And do you think that it's easier for you to do inclusive design work here in Japan or in other countries you worked, and why?
That's a really hard question.
Sorry for that.
No, this is a good question though. So one of the things that like that always strikes me about like Americans in general, and I include myself in this, is when people are like, yeah, we're so woke. Yeah, we got like this little badge I got on Twitter, like I'm an ally. And that happens a lot in design companies where like the general like group of people are very liberal, and then I'm like, why are there no trans people here? Why are there no people of color here? And they're like, but we're super liberal, guys. And like a lot of times in Japanese companies, it can be sort of like people like, oh, I didn't realize that. Like, how do you hire those people, right? So like, that's like a pro, which is to say that there's sort of a liberal blindness sometimes when you're working in like a super liberal like tech industry, whereas in Japan it feels like sort of this like, I didn't realize that, like let's just do that. But the problem is that like there's not as many support systems. There's more support systems in the United States and for people who are in tech and who are in a minority than in Japan. And so that's sort of the double-edged sword, which is to say I can't really say one is better than the other, because like both are equally like very exciting and equally very frustrating. Yeah.
We were talking about stereotypes. I was thinking that in a lot of those agile management, innovation things, you kind of like design thinking, there's a step there that you start with the stereotypes, thinking about user journey and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do you think that could be dangerous if you realize, like you create a persona, for example, and you say this is that, and on the end like you create this, I don't know, something that you cannot change on the end, and you feel like, oh yeah, you create this for this person, but it's actually, there's a whole lot of universe there in between.
Yeah. So this is the reason why I never put genders on my personas, because I think it's silly and there's no reason why an imaginary person has a gender. Me personally, but like the other thing is that I think that the best way to prevent against that is creating personas from accounts of real people. So like going out and talking to people and like asking them what their personal experience is, and then collecting that and like creating that into personas. Now, if you don't have time and you need to like just make these personas very quickly and it's sort of at the top of the head, I also highly recommend validating them, at least with people. And so like, for the most part, when I've made personas in the past, it comes from some sort of foundational research, and then it also comes from validation with the community that we're trying to get into. Now, as far as like management deciding like target personas and that sort of thing, that's a whole different like ball game of like you saying this is our target persona and then management being like no it's not. You're like what? I think that's another sort of like one of the things that I think makes really clear with personas especially is like who in particular are we targeting? And so like I am always very appreciative of like, I don't know, I very much like making personas, but I also don't particularly like making personas so specific that like one person was showing me like a persona of their, it was when they were in design school and the persona had hobbies and I was like, how do you know that? Like, did you talk to someone or like, no, like they just like playing with their dog and I'm like, what is this fantasy? Like, we're in design, like we're designing real things. I tend to be really practical when it comes to those sorts of things, so I hope that helps.
Maybe, sorry.
What's up?
Maybe the problem of the persona itself is that when you are doing a persona, you are trying to find a super stereotypical user. So maybe the persona plays against diversity because you are trying to simplify all your users to 3-4 users.
Yeah, and we like that is perennial. Like, it's one of those double-edged swords, right? Like, perennially, it's good to have somebody decide on like a segment of people to go after. But when I was doing the research with the queer community, we didn't do personas at all. We just like had profiles of different people, and we said like, that person is that story, and this person is this story, and we treated them all as sort of like individual people, and we had 13 people that we did that with. And so, for me, bringing that into like enterprise software, people didn't particularly want to spend that much time and that amount of nuance on people, and so I try to make things as nuanced as possible, but you're right, I mean like, only by really documenting someone else's individual story and saying like, this person has a name and these are their nuances, do we get like true sort of like nuance in persona making. What's up?
So my question is kind of related to people that are doing programming in languages other than English, I guess, for example, like in Japanese.
Yeah.
So in English you gave the pronoun website, but for Japanese perhaps, like I have a friend at uni who's doing research on an emerging new term called X-gender, which is kind of likened to like gender fluid or non-binary, but it's kind of a little bit different to that. So my question is, what advice would you give to people that are trying to make these type of choices in programming in Japan who may not have like access to a comprehensive list that makes sense in the language for them?
Yeah, my recommendation is there are a shit ton of LGBTQ meetup groups on Meetup, on Facebook, that sort of thing. I would go to a group and say, hi, I'm a stupid programmer, like, can you talk to me about pronouns because I'm very, like, I'm trying to make this thing, and like, because that's actually how we first started in the community, is we said, hi, we're dumb, what do we do about community and safety? And like, some very wonderful, generous people like took us under their wing and was like, shh, oh, you stupid babies. Like, let me teach you about this, that, and the other. And my design research partner at the time was a cisgender heterosexual guy. And so like, I had a lot of growing to do, and he had a lot of growing to do in that. So I guess I would just say like, go talk to people about that. Yes.
So I just started working for a company that, like you said, is kind of wannabe woke, where I guess like they put a lot of energy in being LGBTQ friendly and everything. So I guess I'm wanting to bring this information back, something that I gained today.
Yeah.
But I guess like one thing that I can kind of see, picture happening when I do that is being asked why they should care. right? I guess like, so I'm wanting to know like what's the, for the sake of me being able to tell about it, what is the financial incentives? What are the, I guess, why should they care? Why should they concern themselves with it?
Yeah. That is a good question. Like the financial incentives, and for sure. So this was something that came up when we were launching Query as well, which was to say like, we pitched to some investors, and the investors were like, we don't really give a shit, but like, maybe you could be a nonprofit or something like that. And one of the things that I learned from the queer community in Texas is that there's a huge like income disparity between people who have like a ton of money in the queer community and people who like are totally destitute. And so a lot of times when people think about like the queer community, they're primarily thinking about the people who are destitute. And so like, I think my sense about it and what I think you should tell your coworkers is that like, once you do a favor for somebody, they will never forget that. And especially, my experience with the queer community is that when they find somebody like a software company or a group of people that respects their pronouns, or at least just says like, hey, like we respect you as a human being, it is like quite phenomenal. It doesn't matter what software bugs like that software has. People are like, yeah, but they respect me as a human being, so like whatever, right? And I've been pitching this for like a while in the tech industry, and it's only just starting to sort of like get get kind of like traction. But if the baseline is that you respect someone as like a human being, I swear to you, they will give you money. Because respect and trust building is all about like communication and humanity. And so a lot of times I think that people think that respect is sort of like a charity case. And I will tell you that there are many very, very successful startups who are not just like socially motivated, that gave common decency and respect to people, and they got it back 5-10-fold.
Thank you.
Cool. So if there are no other questions, yes.
Question that I wanted to add on, maybe
Yeah.
share some experience that I have. So I don't work for a tech company, but we have Japanese clients, and we make stuff for them that has like a global audience in mind. So we kind of had similar issues with like, especially with issues with like gender, and basically like trying to show women and like some of the products that we make. And something that we, I don't know if this exactly applies to your situation, but what we usually tell our clients is that, you know, like a more international global audience is often very like curious why there are like no women like in a particular piece, or like why are you not demonstrating that like your institute or your company has women working like who do like research or something like that. So you can make the case like depending on like what your audience is, that you know they might be invested, even if like the client isn't so much invested in it, as long as like their target audience is, then you can start making a case that way.
Yeah, that's an absolutely great point. Yeah, absolutely. And for any company that's thinking of going international, that is like huge, which is to say, a lot of times when Japanese companies try to go international, they come off as a little like, Japanese words like katai, which is to say like, you get into like a meeting with a bunch of entrepreneurs, and there's like that one guy in like the nice white press shirt, and like that's sometimes how Japanese websites feel when compared to like outside countries' websites. So that's a hugely important thing. Cool. Any other questions? Awesome. I have a lot of references. These are things that I use to make this slideshow. If you're interested, feel free to read all of these articles. Some of these people are my personal friends, which is so nice, and they're doing awesome work as well. But there's a whole lot of reading about this and a whole lot of cool people who are thinking about this. So thank you so much for having me, and have a great rest of your night.